Good afternoon and welcome to those joining us today for the first time to our 16th annual forum. Hopefully next year we'll be meeting in person. Our two earlier sessions today have been stimulating and thoughtful conversations. We're very excited about the platform that we are representing in thought leadership. And a lot of that has to do with the quality of the people that we're attracting in these conversations. Our final session for the day promises also to be a delight. It enjoys the intriguing title, These Schools and Districts Responded Adaptively and Creatively to COVID, Why? And when Andy first talked to me about this, I was fascinated because I really very interested in periods of adversity and what happens that some people or organizations, I'm particularly interested in the organizational part of it, that some organizations thrive and get through adversity well, and others have much more challenging and difficult times. So I suspect that this is in part what we're going to be talking about. This next hour represents a research project that was conducted by Next Generation Learning Challenges under the leadership of its co-director, Andy Calkins. And Andy, thank you for joining us once again as a moderator, leading such a provocative topic with critical implications for us all in these challenging times. And thank you, panelists, for joining in this conversation. Andy, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you, panelists, including student representative. Love that you're here. Thank you, and all the participants. My name's Andy Calkins. I'm dialing in from Gloucester, Massachusetts. I am going to start in the theme of living in times of adversity by bringing you all into the team meeting room that I was in this morning. We were talking about what happened in Buffalo, and trying to understand why that happens and what was going on in this young man's head. And in order for him to do what he did, what did it take? It required for him to regard whole categories of people as inhuman, including like grandmothers with big flocks of grandchildren, And so there are cultures and systems in place that make that happen in our society. And some of that is somehow, somehow it did not happen for that young man, that he learned that all humans are human in school. And when you get right down to the root stem of this research and what these schools and districts have been trying to accomplish, this is kind of it. They are trying to run their schools in a human-centered way, and not letting the systems and old cultures determine our mindsets and our attitudes. And that can be hard when you're part of big bureaucracies that insist on certain kinds of behaviors, and there are all kinds of systems in place to reinforce it. And so yes, that's drawing a big line from a horrible incident, an indicator of problems in our society, to work that is going on in the schools, work that you are all part of. But let's name it. There it is, and so that's the kind of thing you're going to hear about today. What it looks like in practice to run schools and run whole school districts, big complicated ecosystems, in a human-centered way. And I just could not be more humbled and prouder than to be doing it in the company of the folks that you're going to be meeting shortly. I will take you briefly through the project, where it came from, what it was all about, three quick headlines from it, and then we'll move into the storytelling that you're going to hear from them, because that's really where the power lies, and those are the things that are going to stick with you longest. So, here's the headline from it. We all use those words all the time. We want our kids to be, self-directed, flexible, creative problem solvers and lifelong learners. And how is that going to happen if the adults and their schools as organizations aren't modeling those things? This is what that looks like in practice. So this happened because these 9 organizations, NGLC and the 8 you see here, you're probably familiar with many of them, all got together in the spring, summer of 2020 and said, we're hearing from some schools and districts in our network that they felt strangely prepared for this. They're not waiting for guidance. They're like moving, this is what we're preparing our kids for a world with this kind of stuff in it, and so they were not caught. I mean, we were all caught by surprise, and they would all say, these were challenging, miserable times, and they sort of knew what muscles to lean into. Our big thanks goes to Leon Lowenstein Foundation for funding it. The whole research project took all of 2021, and then we released it this spring. This is what we're going to do. Fast overview, then the presentations. We'll go to a short breakout where you can connect with others in this space about how you might use this research going forward, and then we'll come back together to close. So this is sort of the foundation stone underneath the whole thing. We call this the Grand Agreement, and it was one of the things that drove the design for the whole project. This is like, in some ways, I think the biggest asset that our whole society has right now, perhaps the whole planet, that we universally agree about what kids should be developing right now. I mean, yes, literacy and numeracy, but look at you can line up any group of 20 adults, pull them out of a Kmart, pull them out of a college or a factory or any kind of business, and ask them, and you'll get all the same kinds of skills. This was a Rosetta Stone we did. You'll find it at our site. It's My Ways. Our site is nextgenlearning.org. There's a huge amount of research there, giant agreement among all the researchers, giant agreement among all the employers. It's all those things: problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, originality, leadership, resilience. This is true, believe it or not, across the political spectrum, from liberal leaning kinds of organizations to conservative leaning organizations. They all are pointing to the same thing. Increasingly, this is schools are saying they're all about. When they do reimagined visions of student success that looks like this is Sunnyside out in Arizona. They're using all the same words. And what's emerging right now, so you can see a whole ton of those, you probably all know, I mean, in the schools that can network, you guys are all over this sort of stuff. You can go to Portrait of a Graduate and see hundreds of those things. This is what's emerging right now, is that there are schools and districts that see that this is not only what they say they're all about in terms of envisioning the skills that kids need to develop, but it's also how they should live, how they should work, how adults should define the professional culture that they work in. This was a project that we did over the last 3 or 4 years. You can find it at that website. We'll give this URL for this deck to the Schools That Can people so they can post it and you can have access to it. So you'll have all these links. This is the Grand Agreement, right? Let's build on that. That's what these schools and districts have done. So here are the first of the 3 headlines. Their agentic learning model is their organizational model, right? And so Sunnyside, who I just mentioned, look at this quote from their CAO. this is not just a poster on their walls. This is how we live. You know, we are living out these attributes out loud. And that comes through in all of our interviews with these schools and districts, all 70 of them that were part of this research, and in their surveying that we did. You know, almost 3/4 strongly agreed that part of what helped prepare them for this was that they were so student-centered in their learning model. And in order to get that far, you know, they had to live this sort of thing out loud if they were going to really be genuine about it. What does that look like? You know, everybody's got their usual sort of organizational structure with the board of governors, and then there's district or CMO management or whatever, and then there's school leadership and teachers and students. These folks are flipping it, you know, and instead of each level sort of defining itself around insisting and requiring and mandating the work of the next level right adjacent to them, they define themselves around enabling and catalyzing the level next to them to do their best work and to own it in every way they possibly can, all the way through to teachers and students. So they've turned what in most visuals is a hierarchical chart into what we call this stairway of enabling. They would also all say this is a work in progress. You know, they haven't perfected this, but they're working on it. Finding number 2, communities thrive and advance at the speed of trust plus agency. This won't surprise any of you. They all said culture, 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 people, 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 relationships, relationships. That's where I started this. You know, this is the human part. And it's partly around really valuing relationships and recognizing that in the ways you allocate time and money and resources and facilities, and partly in understanding that, you know, what makes us human, you know, we can adapt, and we don't have to be stuck in strict structures and ways that we know are not producing the outcomes that are on our poster on the wall. And when things happen like a global killer pandemic, what do we do as an organization and a culture? We adapt, you know, creatively. What does that look like? Here's one way that we came up with to show it. Almost all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the 5 whys, which are a way to get down to root causes. This example follows sort of a broken student advisory program. Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Good. And it gets you down to a root cause. These folks are taking a solution-oriented approach that is sort of a mirror of that process, where they start with the 5 hows. You know, we want an advisory program that genuinely serves our whole community, adults and kids. How do we do that? 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 You know, all of that brings them to an attainable, accessible next step. And then they're on the road to making it actually happen. Finding number 3, an organization system should work for its people, not against them. Well, you know, duh, but ask 1,000 educators whether that's true of the system that they work inside of. You know, we could have a pool and see what the results are that we would predict, but it would not be pretty. I can guarantee you that. But these folks said, yeah, you know, this is all about backing up all of that stuff about relationships and culture and adaptability and so on with strong systems, flexible systems that are capable of helping to support work that is human and adaptable and flexible. And what does that mean? It means you've got leaders that understand that and model that. And you're like relentless about the ways you communicate, right? And the technology infrastructure, since that enables so much of this, or it can, serves that role, you know, but it's an enabling role. It's not an end in and of itself. Here's one example of a district, St. Vrain outside of Denver. They just, you know, they could talk for 3 hours about this marriage of culture and systems. And they tell great stories, which I won't tell here because we have live storytellers about what that looks like in practice. You can find some of these stories at the website, which you can find at nextgenlearning.org, and you'll see the banners keep flipping, and you'll get to the prepared project. And we encourage you to go there. When you do, go to one of the subpages on that site that is called Use This Now. And this is the last point I'll make before turning it over to the educators. You know, with the partners, and we were really striving to make sure that we didn't bring this to the field in a way that then made everyone else feel like, well, good, we're already feeling pretty tired and pretty stressed and pretty gloomy post Omicron, you know, and now you're telling us you can feel even gloomier because we're not part of this cool cohort of people. That's not what we're saying. We're saying every one of you out there, including everyone on this call, has some incredible stories, very much like what you'll hear from these folks, of resilient, collaborative, innovative problem solving during the pandemic. Those stories largely have gotten swamped, you know, underneath everything else that's going on out there in schools and across the country. And yet they are the building blocks, you know, surface those. There are lots of ideas on the Use This Now page about how you can turn those stories into the sort of starting places to build them into operating norms that over time, and this does take time, start turning into a sort of new understanding of how we do things here in St. Vrain or Kettle, Moraine or Vista, you know, or the amazing school in rural Appalachia that you'll be hearing about from Jenny Finn later. It's all there in front of you. You've got those building blocks. Now let's hear from actual people, not nonprofit people, about what those building blocks look like. The first one you'll hear from is our good friend, Nicole Allard. Nicole, thank you. Nicole is director of everything amazing and cool for Vista Unified School District right outside of San Diego. And Nicole's going to speak to that sort of first headline finding about schools leaning into these kinds of attributes as their organizational norms. Nicole, thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I'm going to change my business card because I like that title much better than my own. So I appreciate that. Okay, so I have 5 to 7 minutes to share with you some really cool things that Vista Unified is doing around student-centered environments and the structures and systems and policies and procedures that we need to support that. So as we transition to a personalized learning district and have these student-centered environments, we realized that our systems and structures had to support that. So we had to have systems and structures that provided ownership and agency for adults if we expected them to provide ownership and agency for students. And so really it was about taking our learning model and letting that guide our operating model. If this is our portrait of a graduate, or this is what we want students to become, how does how we operate every day support that? I say it a lot, and Andy's heard me say it 1,000 times, that systems and structures really are your value statements. And so if you value student-centered learning, what do we need to support it? And what do we need to support the people who are actually doing the work in classrooms every day? And so how might we engineer time, space, resources to promote our why, which is a why similar to all of yours, to truly prepare our students for, learning, work, and life in the 21st century, which was in Andy's previous slide. When we look at this, I say this too, the whirlwind is real. Like every day we're dealing with the whirlwind, and COVID made the whirlwind more real and more gigantic than it's ever been. And so if we don't, how do we create systems and structures to address the whirlwind? We have to deal with it, right? We have to deal with the health and safety. We have to deal with human relations and budget and all of those things. But how do we address that while at the same time putting even more focus on our wildly important, which is teaching and learning? And so that's kind of our why, and that's our what. And now I want to spend the last 5 minutes of my time just talking about the how. And so I want to lead you through just a few of those systems and structures that truly are our value statements and that truly do support our student-centered learning environment. And the first I want to talk to you about is the importance of having people in your system be change agents. We believe wholeheartedly in that ownership and agency, whether that's with bus drivers or child nutrition service people or our teachers, our counselors, our social workers, our administrators. And so throughout our design for our reopening of school, teachers and staff and principals led our sprint teams and really dug into the work, because we believe that if you're truly going to have adaptive change, then the people that are actually going to do the work should be the people leading the work. And so we create opportunities in our organization all the time for that to happen, including throughout the year, we have lead principals who really oversee huge district initiatives. We have a lead principal for access and achievement. We have a lead principal for equity. We have a lead principal for educational technology. We could staff the district with many, many more people to do that work, but that's not what we want to do. We want to have our principals doing that work because their boots are on the ground every day with our kids. We also have something that called our Talent Development Academy. I call it ta-da, but it's our pathway for our leaders, and in order for them to develop. And so we have teachers in ta-da, we have assistant principals in ta-da, we have principals and coordinators and directors in ta-da, and we take them through a multi-year program of transformation design and organizational leadership, and also a thought collaborative. The biggest thing that we love to do is focus on the strengths, interests, values of our people, because we expect them to focus on the strengths, interests, values of the students. So what do they bring to the table? What do they value? What are they passionate about? And how can we leverage that to do great things for kids? As well as how can we provide student voice in everything that we're doing? A second thing I want to share about is the importance of flexibility. And so as a district, we try to be as flexible as possible, even though we know as a public school system, sometimes that isn't always possible. So we're flexible, even with our roles. We model our values of trust, respect, collaboration, and equity every day. And so when we had to pivot for the pandemic, even our classified members stepped up. We had cabinet members subbing in classrooms or being principals for the day. But we also had bus drivers volunteer to do any job in the district. We had an MOU that they said, as long as it's a classified job, we'll take it. We also had flexibility in our meeting structure. And so we switched a lot to Zoom because we believed that our principals needed to be on their campus and not come into the district office for a meeting. We switched the hours of our meetings to allow for supervision and time with kids and time in classrooms. And also we switched the structure, because what we found was a lot of our meetings were being dominated by health and safety, negotiations, human relations, and we weren't focusing on the wildly important of teaching and learning. And so we actually separated two meetings, and we created a teaching and learning meeting that we call our leadership meeting. And then we created an operational meeting that really does the operational managerial part of being a leader. The third thing that I'll quickly touch on is the importance of budgets. Budgets are your value statements. And so we give the majority of money and the power of that money to sites. We do the big stuff as a district office, salaries and our textbooks and our learning management system. But as far as all the other stuff, we want sites to make the decision, because every site is different. Every student has different needs, and they know the best resources and programs to support that. So they make decisions on technology or on additional COVID dollars or on programs or interventions. They even make the decisions on staffing. And so their master schedule is completely owned by the principals and the teachers. They can have release periods to support district or site initiatives. They can cash in full-time employees in order to get dollars to pay for programs and initiatives that they have on campus. And then with my 1 minute left, I want to talk to you about the importance of communication and community engagement. And I noticed that comment in chat as well. How do you involve community partners? How do you involve parents? We really leaned into this with the school reopening and the fact that we were able to go one-to-one with COVID and also have hotspots. We had 10,400 voices in our school redesign. And that was parents and community members and students and teachers and staff. We had 22 forums that were attended by everybody in our learning community. We sent more community updates than I care to imagine, since I'm the one that had to edit every single one of them. But man, it kept our communities informed to the point where we had 16,000 people logging into our board meetings, and we're only a district of 20,000 kids. We really wanted to make sure that sites were supported with their communication plans so that they had platforms and the ability to communicate as well with their families and with their students, and how to engage them in meaningful and authentic two-way dialogue to support the mission and vision and values of Vista Unified. So I'll end with this. This is a journey. We've been at it for about 10 years. We are certainly not arrived anywhere. We make mistakes. We may fall down, but we just promise to get back up and keep walking, because this is the most important work we will ever do.
Thank you, Nicole. And, you know, every time I hear you speak, I learn something new. And I had not heard the number of people who tuned into your board meetings. I mean, holy smokes.
Terrifying and exciting.
And were we glad that we had moved to a virtual space with 16,000 people in that room?
We didn't really have a space to accommodate that. And also, you know, it's easy to interpret when you're on a Zoom and provide that service to your families.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. So that this was, you know, this is like every person district, you know, 20,000, quite diverse economically, racially, you know, lots of movement in and out of the district. As you heard, lots of community partners and so on. You know, I mean, there's a lot of districts serving a lot of kids that look something like Vista across the country. Theresa Ewald is Assistant Superintendent in Kettle, Moraine, which also looks like a lot of districts across the country, smaller grain size. Also outside of a major city, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but an amazing story to tell about how they came to do the things they have done. And there's a stream of educators going to Kettle, Moraine over the last several years, trying to learn that for themselves. So Theresa, we are so grateful to have you here with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks for sharing again, Nicole. I took some notes here, so my Nicole notes. I'm ready to roll. I appreciate the time. You know, I just think this is such an exciting conversation, and at the start, I feel similar to Andy. I'm outraged is maybe the word I'm going to use. Outraged at the headlines of learning loss and all the assumptions about what happened to our kids during COVID. And I think you might be able to call it learning loss if you're measuring learning in a particular way on a particular test at a particular time. But we in Kettle, Moraine go back a good 13 to 15 years of really putting a stake in the ground to broadening what success means and what the definition of success means. And for us, that was super important because we've always had really high achieving kids, but we had disengaged achievers for decades. And so when we began our move towards personalized competency-based learning, that was our why. It wasn't so much about the achievement piece as measured by standardized tests, but to broaden that. And so I would say COVID really allowed our kids to grow in ways they probably couldn't in a very structured school setting. And so we were pretty excited about that. We have a graduate profile, like many of you do, Portrait of the Grad. And our learners' growth in those areas that are on that portrait, which Andy had shared all that research that suggests that's the real work. Our kids grew in those pieces exponentially, as did our adults. Whether it was resiliency, being engaged, being collaborators, being communicators, those were pieces the kids really had to practice. So we are organized and have been for over a decade in smaller learning environments. We really believe that that community, those trusting relationships, and that learning experience is best built in smaller communities and perhaps not on an entire campus of 1,500 students. So how can we break down that larger group into smaller groups? And that's what we've done. So with that, similar to what Nicole was suggesting, we really live what we We really try to do for the adults what we expect the adults to do for learners. That's one of my kind of battle cries. You can't expect teachers to do for kids what you're not willing to do for teachers. And so because of that, all of our smaller learning environments are led by a director who half teaches and is half administrator. And so their feet are in the classroom and their feet are in administration. And so when we had to, on a Friday, decide we were going to close, and I was determined to have us up and running on Monday. And we were, within 48 hours, we had all of our students, minus our 4-year-old kindergartners, because we didn't really know how to make that happen. But we had all of our students online and learning without much of a hiccup. And it was because of how we model our organizational structures and leadership, which is that as the assistant superintendent, I was trying to run the school district from my dining room table. But all that meant is I was like this big orchestra director, and I got all the leads, the head chairs of each section together. And I trusted that they knew best what their section or their school needed. And our, similar to what Nicole suggested, our meetings became share what you tried, how did it go, should others do it, why or why not? And that was just the theme of the meeting from about March 18th to June 8th. And again, then the following year. And the way we had those structures in place really helped us be successful, so that there was not one way of doing it, which is how we live. We live with this idea that we don't have the recipe, we don't have the book, this is how you do school. We have big, lofty goals for our kids and our adults, and trust that small environments can realize those goals. One of our other big pieces, core tenets, is that we believe learners are designers of learning. And so it's not just adults in Kettle Moraine designing how learning is going to go. So our kids became really quick in being co-designers of this experience, and those feedback loops, because the environments are small, the feedback between learners and teachers and learners and directors was quick, tight, and nimble. And that's how we run every day. When you're in smaller segments within a school, you can be more nimble, and we were able to do that. So we did have technology in place, and I'm really, really grateful that we had lots of systems around our technology in place. And we have the really good fortune, unlike Nicole's district, we have a very high SES. And so our kids were ready with that. And our kids, we let the kids lead on a lot of it. And that helped us determine what we could let go of. Which has been really fun. And do we still let go of that, or do we bring it back? And those are conversations that aren't happening just in my office. Those are conversations happening with kids and with parents. And we also had large board meetings, virtual board meetings too, which was a lot of fun. But we learned how to deal with it. And we learned a lot there too. And I also piggyback on the communication piece. One of our biggest learnings we had pre-COVID and really reinforced itself in COVID is our best communicators are our kids. And when the students know the why and the how, and they are the messenger to their homes, to their communities, we're in a better place. But you can't have your kids being really good communicators unless they're co-designers. And so back full circle to that's how we live, and that's, we built that for a decade, and it really came to the test in March of 2020, and April and May and June. And I just am so proud of the work we've done. And I say we, because I think all educators, I think I'm proud of the educators across the country in their willingness to lean in and model for our kids that you don't, lay in a heap crying. You lean into the challenge, and you do what you can, and tomorrow you get up and do it again. So thanks again, Andy, and thanks
you
for letting us tell our story.
Yeah, no, thank you, Theresa. And just on our way to Jenny, one of the things that we saw and have seen and keep seeing over and over again in Kettle Moraine is just this genuine modeling for kids. And it started when the board said, brand new superintendent, Pat DeClotz, transform student learning, towards these, towards a fuller, richer definition of student success. And what was her response? It wasn't to like convene a little team and then come up with a vision and issue the memo. It was to invite, I don't know the answer. And so we're going to do all this together, and we're going to do 100 little micro pilot experiments, and we're just going to keep cycling and cycling and learning. And some of these things are going to take off. And that's sort of how it played out. But it's because leaders were willing to say, I don't know the answer. We're going to do this together. So Jenny Finn is now going to be our closer on our trio of amazing educators. And we've asked Jenny, who was the founder of Springhouse Community School in Floyd County, Virginia, rural Appalachia, to speak especially around the student role and the student voice in all this, because that's clearly, the central pillar of DNA running through the whole Springhouse model. And it's central to the work that all these districts do. And they would say that every district, every school should do. So Jenny, well, with that, we'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thanks, Nicole and Theresa. It's really inspiring just to hear the work that you're doing and some of the crossovers, especially around networking and just the empowerment of leaders and the trust of leaders to do what needs to be done. So thank you. I typically like to start any kind of conversation I'm having with a poem or a song. So I'm not going to sing today because I don't feel like it, but I am going to read a poem. And this is a poem from one of my favorite American authors. Her name's Terry Tempest Williams. And this is a poem about Springhouse. It's like when I want to talk about Springhouse, this is the poem I read. But it's really a poem for anyone who hopes for a more regenerative, life-giving culture. So here we go. It's a doozy. The eyes of the future are looking back at us, and they are praying for us to see beyond our own time. They are kneeling with hands clasped, that we might act with restraint, that we might leave room for the life that is destined to come. To protect what is wild is to protect what is gentle. Perhaps the wilderness we fear is the pause between our own heartbeats, the silent space that says we live only by grace. Wilderness lives by this same grace. Wild mercy is in our hands. Wild mercy is in our hands. So thank you. And thank you, Terry Tempest Williams. And I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Andy. Springhouse exists in response to this poem. We've known well before the pandemic that wild mercy is in our hands. It's the reason why we exist, because we know that the dominant culture we live in is unsustainable. And we see education as a cultural leverage point to build and create new culture. So what do I want to say about that? Education is really where we decide what we want to pass down to our young people. And that can include young people, depending on where they are developmentally. We decide what is most important to spend all these hours a day living and learning together and pass down. And I think many of us are alarmed at what we see, that what we deem important is what we see. So at Springhouse, we really are a living example of whole system education design change. I never planned on founding a school, never. That was not part of my thing. But I knew that we live in and I was finishing a PhD in education, believe it or not. I still wasn't thinking about founding a school, but it makes perfect sense that education, we can create it to put us to sleep, or we can leverage it to wake us up and respond to what the world needs. That's why Springhouse exists. So just to give you a big picture view, and we know we can't do that alone. We know that this is adults, at least at Springhouse, it's adults and teenagers who are ready to create education that brings us alive. And why do we do that? So that we can respond to what the world needs. It's everyone there knows that Wild Mercy is in our hands. Our curriculum, our assessment, our cultural ways and practices, our programs, everything we do has that at the heart of it, that Wild Mercy, and our responsibility to care for it. So what does that mean on the ground? Springhouse, our vision is regenerative culture, so a life-giving culture, mighty, mighty vision. And the mission is to create vitality-centered education, putting vitality and life at the center to respond to the world's emerging needs. We're on 11 acres. Part of that is a farm. We have 2 programs. We have a full-time day school for teens, and then we have a 2-year program for adults in regenerative cultural design and practice. So adults actually move to Floyd and do that program. Why do we do all of that? Springhouse is a local, small and local example of whole system design change when it orients around life and taking care of life. And we share that through an open and connected network. So there's people in over 10 countries, over 100 people who have gone through our design labs and I'm going to share with you those principles. And so Jara is going to help me do that too. We have a Springhouse student here with us. Thank you, Jara. And we share these design principles globally. So it's not just about us having our fun here in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's about actually being the strongest example of what education can look like when it orients around life, and then having a really strong network that we can share that globally. It's mighty. It's a mighty vision, but we take it one day at a time. So as you can imagine, vitality-centered education looks very different than what we're used to conventionally. And because we're, kind of a free agent here, we are an accredited school in Virginia, but we have a lot of freedom and autonomy to really imagine what could be possible and to live it every day. So after a year-long process of really looking at, Springhouse is heading into its 9th year. We spent a year in a research focus group. I think this was right before COVID, where we articulated design principles. What is Springhouse doing, and why are we doing it? Teens were involved in that, community members, board members, staff, and sat in my office and tussled around with that. And we came up with 5 design principles. The first principle is to take care of vulnerability. And this is where soon Jara is going to come in here. We take care of vulnerability in ourselves and in our community and with the earth. That's always, and that is just regular language where it's like, wait, does this take good care of that Wild Mercy? If it doesn't, why are we doing it? That's just a regular question. And you will hear older teens asking that question as they co-create education with us. We don't even do the whole teacher-student separation. It's like we're all in different places here, co-creating education, learning together. And it's a powerful experiment in doing that. Like I said, one I didn't plan on being in. So the other thing we do is the second principle. We take care of vulnerability, and then we cultivate personhood. We know a person, very much like Parker Palmer talks about, your personhood is the gift to the world, your very personhood. So we need to take care of it. And one of the ways we do that is by empowering teenagers. So they are at every level of leadership of the school. There's a team that works closely with me in leadership, curriculum development, trip planning, everything. Jara is on, and we call that the round table. Jara is on that round table. So I'm going to ask Jara to take a minute or less to just talk about what it's like to be on the round table. And then if I have any time left, I'll close with the 2 principles and we'll wrap up. But Jara, you want to come on in and let us know what your role is on the round table at Springhouse?
Sure thing. Thanks, Jenny. Sorry for my camera being off now. I was having a little bit of trouble connecting to the internet. But yeah, so my name is Jara. I'm finishing my 10th grade year at Springhouse. And at the start of this school year, we had an awesome opportunity to pair with one of the Springhouse staff and work directly alongside them for a common goal. I was chosen by a staff member named Sarah to work on figuring out our school's impact on the earth and how we as a school could be more sustainable. So I'm going to talk about some of the things we did this year. The first one was with our compost. We have a little farm It's only growing bigger every day. And so we have 3 compost bins that we wanted to incorporate the wider community with. And so we've invited people to contribute to that. We soon after that teamed up with some students from the London Interdisciplinary School way over in Europe to work with trash and recycling and really figure out and track where that's going and what's happening with it. So they've created an awesome report for us there. The final thing that I was most kind of excited about going into this was figuring out our carbon footprint and ways that we could reduce it and really help. So just a few weeks ago, actually, we had a tree planting day that we had some other schools come over, and we planted 75 trees on our property to offset a massive amount of carbon that we're producing every year. Yeah, I think that the work we do is really necessary because we need to be accountable for how we treat the earth. And that's really it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Jara. Awesome, awesome work. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm going to wrap up quick, probably, right, Andy?
Just lay the other principles on us. I'm
Okay,
doing
I'm going to
another
lay it
chat.
on. So respect the wisdom of, or no, I'm sorry. It's take care of vulnerability, cultivate personhood, build beloved community. Lots of ways we do this: singing, dancing, mentoring, rites of passage program, which Jara, I was going to have him talk about it, but we may not have time. He had a rites of passage where older boys in the school and mentors came, I think it was to his house, I can't remember, but really celebrating his growth. The 4th principle is respect the wisdom of the earth. So learning especially about interdependence and how to work together in ways that respect our individuality. And then loving and serving others. That's why we do it all. We do it all to love and serve others. And so those are the 5 principles. I can put them right there in the chat. And I'm just going to wrap up by saying that I think many of us are clear that educational design, the conventional way that we design education, is perpetuating an unsustainable culture. I often hear about what the dream can be, and I love that. It's inspiring. We need living examples like we're hearing from here. Theresa, Nicole, Springhouse, many others in this research project that are actually doing things differently in different contexts, because I think it's those examples that bring hope. So I put stuff in the chat. Feel free to follow up if anyone has any questions. I know it's a lot. Thanks so much. And thanks, Jara.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Jara. Love having your voice be part of this, and love the work that you're doing. And so everyone, because we are in a Zoom webinar format, we apparently can't break us all into breakout groups, which we didn't like make that clear to ourselves when we started all this. So we can't do that, but we're a group that can like make that happen in the size that we are. I think Rainsford is going to unmute you all so that you can raise your questions, observations, comments. If you want to ask any of the educators or Jara anything, this would be the time to do it. While you're starting to come in, we'll answer the one question that was right there, Norton, from you earlier. This was about this graphic. I'll take you back to it because this thing right here, what's the role of parents and community in this? They would all say, I think that parents and community are everywhere, at every level in this stairway of enabling. The board can't set the vision and the goals and the policies without lots of input from all of those stakeholders, and that's how they roll. And then the district can't really craft their strategies without doing the same thing, and it goes from there. So everyone in this model is an ally, and is invited into being part of the work. St. Vrain, that Colorado district I mentioned, has like 5 different levels of engagement that they offer to the members of their community. All the way up to, really intensive monthly, year-long executive, seminars for groups of 20 people who just want to really go deep and like get inside of all the things that the school district is grappling with. So, and that's that. There was another question about how can, yes, Tamika, from you, how can one partner with any of these schools, with these networks as a speaker and life coach? I mean, they're all looking for outside expertise. If you want to get in touch with me, I know where these folks all live and others. My email address, Tamika, is Calkins, ACALKINS @nextgenlearning.org. Please just reach out to me. This is all hands on deck a moment. And so with that, anybody else who's got a sort of burning question, I'm so delighted to see some friends here. Grace at GM Belfiore, there you are. We're not seeing you, but Grace is one of the co-authors of My Ways, which was part of that whole grant agreement story that I was telling you. So welcome, Grace. But anyone who would like to raise something, and you can just take yourself off mute and do that, or stick it in the chat window. Oh gosh, I see others here. Jennifer Husbands, look at you. We're just delighted to have you and all of you here in this moment. What is it that these educators told you that makes you either say, yeah, that could work here, or no, that could never work here?
Well, and I think, Andy, there was one in Q&A that Theresa and I were writing about that maybe it's something we could talk about, which is advice to districts who want to get where we are starting now coming out of COVID.
Great.
First step, same timeframes, or anything different now? And I don't know, Theresa, if you want to start, and then I'll just pop in.
Right. I feel like it's never too late to start. And I've been thinking about people asking about the community, and as Nicole was sharing about the board meetings, one of the things I feel like we did right without knowing how right we were was we led with learners. We don't do board reports as adults. We are not the chief communicators. Our learners are the communicators. They do the reports, and they help lead some of our teams who are trying to educate parents, and we have 2 new board members, and it's their schools. It's not ours. I've already, like I tell my students, I've already done 10th grade, so I'm good. It's your time to be in 10th grade. And what is that going to look like? And so I think anything you do to elevate the voice of the learner in a real way with real choices, not made up choices or non-choice choices, as I like to call them, but real choices and real design. That to me feels like a first step. I think our kids are hungry for it. They're hungry for real, and they have opinions, and they're smart, and it's their school.
Yeah.
And if I could add to that, Theresa, I suspect all of the adults are hungry for real too.
Yes, they are.
In this moment. We had one partner in this prepared project tell us a story this week about his wife, who is a teacher at Oakland Unified. And they were in a conversation about how the kids are right now. And she said, I think the word for it is disappointed. They were out there for, parts of a year, running their own thing and trying to learn remotely and whatever else. And then by degrees, they came back, and now we're sort of fully back, and they're looking around and saying, nothing changed, and it's like every time they're looking at us, they're saying, did you not learn anything from that? Can we just like pause and talk about what just happened and build on it and learn from it? And and the adults are probably all saying the same thing right now. Nicole and Jenny, any other fast answers to this question about advice you would offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I wrote it down, I think the liberatory design process completely fits with this, because there's a noticing and an empathizing part. And I think too often we design around students instead of designing with students, or we design for students because we somehow think we know what they need without listening to truly what it is. And so it makes you intentionally listen and have empathy panels and collect amazing street data about what is truly happening and what they experienced and what they're expecting. Because hopefully the pandemic just causes everyone to say, this is our opportunity to change education right now. And there's never going to be a time in our lifetime like the time we have right now to leverage change.
Yeah. Jenny, any last words of advice?
You know, I think I'm grateful to be here. And I think what Springhouse offers is kind of like it's sort of like Wild Mercy unfurling in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And so if you're sitting there thinking, well, that sounds like something I could never do, or we have all kinds of people that have gone through our design labs, all the way from doctors teaching in hospitals and wanting to build beloved community in their resident groups, to teachers in more conventional settings all around the world. And then those who are ready to kind of leave it behind and do something different and more community neighborhood based or whatever. So it's hard in 7 minutes to convey what is happening. So I think if you, go to the website, and Springhouse just really mostly wants to be supportive and inspiration at the same time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so it's Springhouse, you put it in the chat, I think.
I
right?
did, springhouse.org. Yeah.
Great. And closing word, just to show you where you can find much more about all this. So here's the URL, nextgenlearning.org/prepared-project. If you just remember nextgenlearning.org, you'll get there. And then the page that I was mentioning before, use this now. This is like full of big ideas for how you can begin to marshal the stories of resilient problem solving that are in your district to help build these muscles. That's what this is all about. It's so much of this is just like good learning design with kids. It's agentic, it's personal, it's relevant, it's all of those things. That's the way organizations should operate too. And there's great stuff in here to help you move along the way. We know schools in this network are already in. You all would join in this conversation and have stories of your own to tell, because that's the kind of work you do.